Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Through Help and Back. Very excited to have you here today. Really excited for this episode. You know, Through Help and Back has covered a lot of different issues, and we've brought on a lot of different experts so far. You have heard from psychiatrists, you've heard from doctors, you've heard from faith healers and sound healers, and you've heard from a lot of people on the healing side of the equation, right? People that are offering services or people that are offering interventions to help people heal. What we want to do more of, and what we're going to get to do today, and I'm really psyched about, is we want to hear more from people who have received these healing efforts and have received these interventions, and talk about the experience of those interventions, both good and bad, and the impact of these interventions. You know, do these things work? What are the long-term effects? You know, was it a good idea? Is it something that you would do again? Really want to bring this to a well-rounded human experience, talking about the experts who offer the help, and then also talking to the real experts, the people who receive the help and can talk about the impact of that. So I have a good friend of mine on today, very gracious with her time, very lucky to have her. She goes by TS, and she is joining us today. We're going to talk about adolescent interventions. We're going to talk about adolescent psychiatry, mental health relating to children and adolescents. And we're going to talk about some of the things that people do maybe in an attempt to help that can sometimes turn out to be less than help or actually, have the opposite effect. So TS, thank you so much for being here today. How are you?
I'm good, Jason. Thank you so much for having me. That was a lovely introduction.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Well, you're a lovely person, so I wanted to do it justice, and I wanted to introduce you the right way. I do want to health check you here. You've got a really nice sweatshirt on. You've got the mask going. Like, the heat is going crazy. Like, are you comfortable? You're doing all right? Everything's good?
Oh, of course. I work outside actually. So.
Oh, nice. You're tough.
Oh yeah, I'm good with the heat.
Well, and it's funny because we're not so far past COVID, right? That like the mask was not a rare thing to see, but nowadays it's kind of different. And so I'll let you speak a little bit more about that, but I do want to comment to our audience, part of a TS situation requires a level of confidentiality. And that's why, it wasn't just a generic intro about feeling very lucky to have you. I know that you've got some stuff going on that requires that, a little bit of confidentiality, a little bit of privacy, and we want to be ultra respectful of that. So that's the reason for the mask. But yeah, we're glad that you're here, mask and all. So welcome.
Thank you so much. So I'm talking a little bit about the mask. I've been online doing this, on TikTok, and Instagram was more recently since March of 2022, I think. And I've been very careful about not having my name anywhere, not having my real face anywhere. And it started as a, confidentiality privacy thing. And people ask about it. And now it's really more that it's I've invested in a lot of really nice bandanas and pretty masks, and I like having them.
Yeah, no, it's like a brand for you now, right? Like, it's your thing.
Mm-hmm. My hope is that one day I'll be able to, speak without the mask and have my real name and everything. But for now, I just feel more comfortable this way.
I know a little bit about your story, and I can't wait to bring it to our viewers, and it's amazing. But I'm going to put an early bid in when you're ready for the demasking. You're always welcome to come back and share that, and maybe even perform that on this show. I'd love to host that. That'd be amazing.
I'll keep that in mind. Thank you.
Yeah, follow-up episode, the demasking of TS.
Yeah.
So let's dig into this. So, what we're talking about ultimately are residential treatment centers for adolescents and young adults. Okay, and so I want to give a little bit of background from my side of this. I've worked in addictions for a long time, and I shared this with you. And a lot of times we would work with adolescents, and there would be issues, right? The short-term treatments wouldn't work. Multiple interventions wouldn't work. The meds wouldn't work, whatever the case may be. And parents would kind of get to a place where they were at a loss. And so it was always phrased to me and explained to me that, wilderness and residential treatment for adolescents is a higher level of care. If things aren't working at a lower level of care, it's time to, try something more extreme and work up the ladder and go to a higher level of care. So you have been through that experience. Do you want to give us a little bit of background from your side about, just kind of how you ended up in a wilderness program? Not necessarily like, hey, this was the day and I left, but was this something that you and your family were having issues as a young child and as a teenager and it progressed? Or what was your experience of receiving early help that ultimately led to that, being an option for you?
Yeah, so I'll start off with that. I was raised in an abusive and neglectful household. So I am not sure when I realized that something was wrong. I don't want to say wrong with me, but something was the matter and I needed help. I'm not sure when I realized I needed help, because for many years my parents would tell me that like everything I was experiencing was normal. I didn't need help. There were years, literally years, when I was asking if I could see a psychiatrist, if I could get medications, and my parents refused. They told me that if I just exercised more or ate healthier, then I wouldn't be trying to hurt myself or be sobbing on the floor every night. I was sexually assaulted as a teenager, and after that is when kind of the mood in my life shifted from, oh, she's crying a lot and feels very lonely and friendless, to I was self-harming. I developed an eating disorder, and I saw a therapist briefly for that, but that specific therapist told me things like, my depression was my own choice, and that me being lonely was my own fault. So that didn't last a very long time.
I'm sorry, just as a therapist, that's a hard thing to hear, that type of feedback, as if you could just choose otherwise,
Right, exactly. So that was early high school, and I stopped hurting myself and really having an eating disorder kind of the year after, just because I was getting further away from the traumatic event. But I definitely, yes, did have a history of struggling with mental health, needing help, and not really getting it. And it wasn't very obvious to a lot of people outside the house, because my family in a lot of ways seemed like a very competent, kind, loving family. Both of my parents work very high-level jobs. They're incredibly successful. I had straight A's my entire life. I've taken the hardest course load my entire life. I was always involved in a lot of extracurriculars, volunteering, academic extracurriculars. So up until my senior year of high school, I was struggling immensely, but it would be hard to tell if you didn't know me very personally. At the beginning of my senior year of high school, my mother, who had been verbally and emotionally abusive to me, it escalated to physical abuse. She pulled me out of bed by my hair and then dragged me across the floor of my room and tried to pull me out of my door and down the stairs of our house. And I left home after that. I moved in with, well, I said family friends. And it wasn't until then that I was sent to wilderness therapy.
Gotcha.
In the first letter my parents sent me in wilderness therapy, which is known as the impact letter, it's a form of attack therapy. Like, you weren't allowed any contact with your parents. You have to sit in this group of strangers that you don't know, because you haven't been allowed to talk to anybody else either. And you have to read out loud this letter from your parents about why they sent you and all the terrible things you did. And you have to read it out loud. You're not allowed to explain anything. You're not allowed to defend yourself. And then the group makes observations about like the kind of kid you were. But in that letter, my mom tells me that I think caused irreparable damage to her and my father's reputations, because CPS was investigating them for child abuse.
I mean, that's what was it like to hear that out loud? I mean, because is that the first that you had heard of that, where they said, "Hey, we know that you're struggling, but we want to talk about our reputations"? Did you kind of have a sense of that's where their priorities were, or was that the first that was kind of revealed?
That's a great question. I'm not sure how much my parents knew something was wrong with me, either like intentionally they just didn't know, or they were blocking it out because they didn't want it to be true. I do know that after I was sexually assaulted, I went to my parents and I said, please take the razor blades out of our house because I'm going to hurt myself with them. And they didn't. And then I know the next year I handed my dad the razor blade I was using, as well as I was drinking like vanilla extract to self-harm, which is like 99% alcohol per volume. And
Right.
I handed those to him and I was like, I'm self-harming. I'm trying to like kill myself. please, like, don't give these back from me. Like, to me, take them away. And like a day later, I just found them in my dad's car and I took them back, but he didn't say anything to me about it. And when I came to my parents later and was like, I have an eating disorder, and my mom said that she knew, and she'd known for years. I also remember a comment my mother made, like a couple months after I started self-harming, where she said that, like, my arms looked ugly, so I should stop. So I'm genuinely not sure about my dad. At the very least, my mother knew that I was self-harming, that I had an eating disorder for years.
We talk about never underestimating the power of denial, right? And so you made a comment early on, if parts of your resume looked really good, right? Look at the straight A's, look at the volunteer work, look at the active, social life, look at the, being well-spoken and academically sharp. Okay, let's focus on that, because there's the second page of the resume that has some troubling things and some things that really need a lot of attention. But if we can just stare hard enough at the grades, if we can just look hard enough at the volunteer work, we maybe can convince ourselves that that's not as much of a problem. Maybe she's just being dramatic. So I want to kind of go back to your story a little bit. So you had some feelings that something was off prior to your sexual assault, right?
Yes.
Like you didn't feel comfortable. You had some symptoms before. Like, what were you feeling prior to that event that was causing you issues?
I've had anxiety as long as I can remember. In middle school, that got worse, which is, like, I'd say a normal middle school thing, just becoming very self-conscious about myself, what I looked like, what other people, thought of me, or whether or not they liked me. And of course, the abusive household never helps that, because at home I was being told that, like, nobody would ever love me because I hadn't, unloaded the dishwasher that night, or like I was fundamentally unlovable, or like I was, I thought I had narcissistic personality disorder or antisocial personality disorder for many years, because I was told repeatedly that I was a narcissist and a psychopath. So in addition to the regular teenage self-image problems, I was being told by the people I loved most that I was fundamentally unlovable, and that all the people I loved would leave me because I was such a terrible person.
And that got in? You started to believe it?
Yeah, I mean, yes. You're a kid, If anybody tells you anything for long enough, you'll believe it. But especially when you're a child, and this is coming from, your parents, who know everything because they're your parents and they know you best and they love you. So of course, eventually I was like, oh, so, I guess my mom and my dad would know these types of things. So I guess I am, like, unlovable. Transferring from middle school to high school was a really rough transition for me. I went to a really small middle school with, I think, 12 people in 8th grade, to a giant high school with, I think, 400 people in my grade when I didn't know anybody. And then my regular anxiety got much worse because I didn't know anybody. I was really shy. I wasn't sure how to make friends. Before I was assaulted, I'd spend a lot of time crying. I drew a lot of pictures of, like, me standing on the edges of buildings or me jumping off buildings. So I'd say, like, 12, 13, I had, at the very least, like, passive suicidal ideation. After I was sexually assaulted was when it got much worse.
Of course. The assault, and we don't have to go through the police reports, but was this an acquaintance? Was this an attack? I mean, what were some of the circumstances around that event? Because I'm imagining some trust issues developing. I'm imagining a lot of self-doubt. I'm imagining a lot of social issues, right? And you're like, how do I fit in? How do I make friends? And so, my concern here is, if this was an acquaintance or somebody that you knew, sort of preying on those issues, So
I don't know how much I can go into it because of reasons outside of my control. I will say that it was somebody I trusted and somebody I considered to be a friend of mine.
And what I'm really getting at here is, and thank you for sharing that much. There's a certain level, if you imagine this person, you imagine 12-year-old you, 13-year-old you, 14-year-old you, and these attacks are creating vulnerabilities, right? And so what we often say is, if you have somebody who is a potential victim and you have somebody who's a victimizer, they will find each other. You know what I mean? There's something about those vulnerabilities that are like big flashing lights to potential victimizers. And they find you, right? And these are the types of things that can happen. The other thing that I think that's really important about your story to highlight is that mental health and the struggles that go along with that don't look the same for everybody. You imagine somebody who's just a wreck, but in a lot of ways you weren't. In a lot of ways you were holding it together and you were, productive, and yet you were still struggling. How were you able to do that? How were you able to have all of that going on and still achieve and still be productive? I mean, it feels like something that I might collapse under the weight of, and yet here you are at 12 handling it and in some ways thriving. How did you do that?
I guess I just didn't consider myself as having any other option. Even in elementary school, I had good grades, was high achieving. In middle school, I had good grades and was high achieving. I didn't consider not being high achieving to be an option, because especially in middle school, that was a lot of what my identity revolved around. Like, well, I'm fundamentally unlovable, but at least I can get straight A's. At least I can be on the soccer team. At least I can, fundraise money for food for, the Humane Society. The question, like, how did you do this, is so interesting to me, because I think for a lot of people, we don't feel like there are other options, or we don't consider those other options.
But there are, right? I mean, suicide is an option, and people sadly take that option. And although you considered it, you didn't go that way. Quitting is an option. Running away is an option. Blowing, just blowing the whole thing to pieces and hitting the road. You know what I mean? Like, there are some dramatic options out there, right? And I don't know. I just think in retrospect, you deserve a lot of credit for what you could do during that time under some very difficult circumstances. And maybe as you get older and look back on your situation, hopefully the strength you found during that time rises to the top of the story as the hurt, you know what I mean, hopefully fades away. So you mentioned getting a therapist for a while.
Yes.
All right. So was that kind of your parents' effort at intervention, or what other things did they make available to you or try to do to help you?
I asked my parents after I was assaulted to see a therapist. I went to one, and then in the middle, I think maybe like 2 or 3 months in, my dad was like, so what is your therapist helping with? And I was like, oh, kind of nothing. And then he called my therapist and had a long conversation with her, and then came back to me and was like, you're not going to her anymore. My parents took me, I think, 2 more, maybe this was before this therapist. I think I saw 3 different therapists right after I was assaulted. This one was the one I stuck with the longest, but after I stopped seeing her, I didn't see anybody else. And at the beginning of my junior year of high school was when I was seeing a therapist again. And that lasted all the way up through the time I was taken to treatment.
Primarily just the individual therapist. Did you ever see a psychiatrist or ever receive any medications?
So for many years, I wasn't allowed to. Eventually, I asked to be put in a psych ward.
Okay.
And my parents agreed, but they said that they wanted me to, I was in the intensive outpatient program because they didn't want somebody else to have custody of me, which I think is ironic, because then like 5 months later, I was sent to Utah from Kentucky
right.
with someone else having legal custody of me.
Not yet. We don't want anybody to have custody of you yet. Yeah.
Exactly. But I was intensive outpatient there for 2 weeks, and I got medication there finally. This was the end of my junior year. After the physical abuse at the start of my senior year, I went to a different intensive outpatient program for 3 weeks. So I had medication by the time I was sent, but I was on this medication for several months that wasn't working for me at all. And then we had the period that everybody has with medications, where they're throwing all these different medications at you to just see what works. And they're like, oh, you ADHD? Do you have bipolar disorder? Like, what's happening? So when I was sent to Wilderness, I think they were still trying me on one of the many antidepressants or medications that I've tried. But there was about, let's see. So May was when I was first medicated. And then June, July, August, September, October, November. November was when I was sent. So there was about 6 months of me being medicated before I was sent to treatment.
Did any of it, in your opinion, make a difference? Did any of it work, whether it be the medications, the IOP, which for people, IOP is just a level of care. I assume you're going to group like 6 to 9 hours a week and getting like individual therapy with it. You had your individual therapist. I mean, were there periods of time where things got better? Did any of it work, or were you pretty much just kind of on the same track despite those interventions?
I think were I not physically abused my senior year, I think I would have gotten through it.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how well I would have gotten through it because a lot of the stress I had was coming from all of my extracurricular involvements. I was taking the hardest course load my school offered. So a lot of the stress was coming from that. I'm not sure how well, in all honesty, I would have finished my senior year. I'm not sure if I would have still had straight A's.
God forbid.
Yeah, like what if I got a B?
Just saying,
Because I was consistently stuck in stressful situations. I'm not sure anything could have helped a lot. What really helped me was moving out of my parents' house and into this family friend's house. But even with that, it was a thin line I was walking.
But you raised a really important point, because a lot of times when we think about healing, we think about what can we add to make it better. I'll add therapy, I'll add exercise, I'll add medications. But you have to understand, like, it's literally an attack on your nervous system, right? Stress and abuse is a nuclear attack on your nervous system. So sometimes it's not about what you add, but what you can remove from your situation. You can add these protective mechanisms, or you can reduce the stress. You can get stronger, or you can stop being attacked, right? And be okay where you're at. So it's interesting because we're kind of playing with this idea of what I made it through, what I have survived, what I have thrived. But what's a key point that you're talking about is what would have really helped me is to not be hurt all the time, and to not have to like go through the pain again and then build up my reserves and then recover and then go through the pain again and then rebuild. I mean, sometimes we just get really exhausted and tired of rebuilding, and bouncing back. It takes a lot out of a person, much less a teenager. So tell me a little bit about, conversations. I'm guessing not many, but like things aren't working. What got the parents thinking, okay, we got to go bigger here. We've got to do something else. Like, how did, extreme options like sending you away, how did that enter the picture? Why did that become an option?
I don't know, because my parents won't really talk about it. And the information they give me, I'm not sure how true it is.
Well, from your experience, what life was just going on, and then one day you were in a van, or like, how did this evolve? What was going on with you?
So I'm counting on, I was abused physically at the very beginning of my senior year. And then I moved away, and then I came back to the house because my parents promised that they just wanted me there. I wouldn't have to interact with them or anything. And they went back on that almost immediately. I went to another intensive outpatient in a psych ward, and then I came back from that. And then when I still wasn't immediately better, I think they didn't like it. I think they really didn't like the CPS investigation. I think,
Gotcha.
Especially my mother did not like that I preferred being in somebody else's house to her own. She wrote about that in her impact letter too, actually.
Maybe it embarrassed her on some level,
Yeah. And there was a point where, I was having to leave class constantly and trying to go home all the time because I was having these massive panic attacks and I couldn't function.
You weren't functioning.
Yeah, but I didn't have a 504 plan or an independent learning plan. So the only option was to go home, but there came a point where the counselor was like, well, let's try to keep you here and not go home. And I was like, no, I need to go. I need to leave. And I walked out of my high school and I got suspended for that. I think that was when my parents really became upset.
Gotcha.
I don't know if they sought out an educational consultant on their own or somebody at school advised them to find an educational consultant. I don't know the conversation between my educational consultant and my parents, but I think pretty soon after they hired an ed consultant, I was sent away.
Were you making active attempts on your life? Like, were you harming yourself during this time?
No, I wasn't.
Panic attacks, difficulty at school, the suspension, which is hilarious because let's punish those that are struggling, you know. Okay. And so then they hire an educational consultant, which is interesting. What does an educational consultant do? What was the point of the educational consultant to like help you stay in school, or like what was the intended goal of that role?
So the entire industry of educational consultants is super sketchy because you all you need is a high school diploma. They encourage you to have a college degree, but there are no like classes you have to take. There's no certification you have to fulfill. My specific educational consultant, who my parents paid to send me to treatment centers, for several years she worked in a treatment center and then she helped found one. And now her job is to send children to treatment centers.
So part recruiting, part like client acquisition, but they're called in when like the like if it works right, if it works well, they're called in when a student is struggling and hopefully put a plan together and help them get back on track and finish high school. But you feel like this one may have had other motives because of her background.
A lot of them do have other motives. Most of the people I know in the troubled teen industry were recommended there by an educational consultant. Of course, I haven't met all educational consultants, but from what I've heard, a lot of the time, they will just immediately say, well, you can just put your child in this special school for children with these problems.
Who pays them? Who pays the education consultant?
Oh, the parents. The parent. They're private.
I was wondering if they weren't like almost like paid by the treatment centers. You know what I mean? It almost feels like business development on some level. You know?
So I don't think they can legally get kickback. I've heard rumors that they can get kickbacks from the treatment centers. I've also heard that legally isn't permissible. What I do know is that these treatment centers, which have, millions of dollars because they're charging parents tens of thousands of dollars a month to have their kids there, will have these ed consultants come and put them in a nice hotel and have a conference with all this nice catered food, and say, oh, since you're here, learn more about our program and recommend us.
Yeah, they used to call those junkets in the medical world, right? Like there was a new drug, and they would have an educational conference in Hawaii, and they would fly out all these doctors to learn about the drug. And what do you know? When I was taught about these residential programs, these wilderness programs, right? The pitch was, you eliminate all distractions, you eliminate all outside influences, you allow the child to focus on their development, what they need to be doing differently. It's a way to kind of zero everything out, stop all the noise, and reconnect the child and the family so that they can address these issues that got them there in the first place. That's what's on the brochure. What is it actually like? Take us through, how did you start? And if you get sent to a treatment center, here's what you're actually in for.
Right. So most of the time, the educational consultant or the company themselves will manipulate the parents, right? If the parents are scared of a child's drug use, they'll tell the parents that their child will absolutely end up overdosing if they don't send them. If the child is suicidal or struggling with self-harm, they'll tell the parents that the child will kill themselves if they're not sent to these programs. So I want to make it very clear that parents are also manipulated by these companies, and are also very convincing because the parents aren't there. The parents are usually very desperate and feel like they've lost their real child and they want help. And there's this company saying that we can help you. And also our treatment facilities have to be good because they're so expensive. Why'd we charge so much if they didn't do anything? So most treatment facilities will recommend that the child is gooned, which is slang. It's called a transport service. Mm-hmm. The way a transport service works is in the middle of the night, so 2 to 3 a.m., two strangers will come into your house, pull your child from their bed, and tell their child that they have to go with these transporters. And they can do it the easy way or the hard way. The easy way is you comply, and the hard way is that police are called, or that the child is zip-tied, or they will physically restrain the child and hold them down. So after transport, you will be put in a locked van and driven to wherever you're going. I had to go on a flight and sleep in a hotel with these two transporters. The next day, I was put in another locked van with two members of the treatment, my wilderness center, and they drove me to a base camp. At the base camp, I had medical procedures like physicals. I was strip searched without my consent, of course. And they give you your wilderness gear. They didn't allow me to keep anything of mine. I asked to keep my journal. That was like a safety item for me. They said no. I said, well, can I at least keep like this hair tie? And they said, no, you can't have anything that's yours. And then they drove me about 2 hours into the Uinta Mountains in Utah, and I was put in a tent and I went to sleep. If you're in wilderness therapy, that's going to happen. If you go straight to a residential treatment center, I know that transport is less common for them, but it's almost always recommended.
So from an informed consent perspective, how is this explained to you and what is explained to you? Like, you know, any medical care, you're supposed to provide informed consent, which is like, here's what you're getting into, right? Was it explained? Like, did you know ahead of time that all this was going to happen?
No, absolutely. Most treatment centers say, like, you know, don't tell your kid because they're not going to want to come, which, you know, obviously. Yeah. But the parents also don't know very much about what's actually going on in these treatment centers because they make it sound so nice. No, I wasn't living at my parents' house, but I was picked up from a doctor's appointment by these strangers, and my parents watched as I like burst into tears, fell onto the ground, and then eventually got into the van. Let's see, the transporters, because the transport services are another company. So you have the educational consultant, which the parents are paying for independently. You have the treatment centers, which the parents are paying for independently because insurance usually doesn't even cover them because they're not proven to be an effective method of treatment. And then you have the transport services, which are a third company that you are also paying for independently. So when the transporters came and got me, they said that I guess I'd been struggling, and my parents and psychiatrist and therapist had all decided this was the right move for me, which wasn't true at all. Neither my therapist or my psychiatrist knew that this was happening. And they told me that it would be like a summer camp and that I shouldn't be there too long because I seemed like a good kid. So I thought this was, the middle of November. I thought I'd be home by Christmas. When I was put in the wilderness therapy program's van, they told me that it was 8 to 10 weeks that I would be there. I was there for 13 weeks. And then after the 13 weeks I was there, I was sent to a residential treatment center. And I was there for 6 months. And the only reason I got out after 6 months was because I turned 18 and I got all my credits to graduate high school. So they couldn't keep me any longer.
Sexual trauma survivor. Fast forward, I'm being strip searched and detained and zip tied. And I'm also spending the night in hotels with strange people. I have to imagine things got a lot worse before they got better for you. I mean, did that bring all that stuff back? Did you cope with that? Did you go into survival mode? Like, what is that experience even like for you to go through that? Was it just pure confusion? I mean, were you panicked? Were you scared? Like, how were you feeling?
I was in shock for a long time. I thought with the entire time I was with the first transport group, I thought I'd be home in like 3 weeks, right? And then when I got with the wilderness people and they were like, you're going to be here for 8 to 10 weeks, I said, there must be, some mistake. I'm a good kid. Like, I don't need this. There's a mistake. Call my parents. And then I didn't fight them, but I like screamed really loudly. I took off my seatbelt and I laid on the floor. I would try to they had to physically hold me because I was trying to bang my head against the walls and throw things at them once we got to the base camp facility. I hadn't self-harmed for a very long time by the time I was in wilderness, but wilderness made me relapse in ideation significantly because the thought that I was going through for the first 3 to 4 weeks was like, if I can just jump off of this cliff, if I can just hurt myself badly enough, if I can just fall and break my leg, then I can leave. And then, in terms of sexual trauma, there was the strip searching. And then we had I had to sleep in a hotel room with a male transporter and I wasn't allowed any privacy. Like, I couldn't shower with the door closed. When I was in the wilderness program, we had male staff sometimes. And at first they were accommodating to the fact that a lot of the kids in my group had sexual trauma, even us being teenagers, 14 to 17. And then there was one week where we had a male staff and myself and some other group members were like, hey, we don't want him sleeping in the tent with us. Like, we've been through this before. And the female staff were like, well, this would be a great way to confront your trauma, he'd have to set up his own tent. It would take so long. Do you really want to make more work for him? You're clearly, if you said no, you wouldn't be focused on healing your trauma, with the undercurrent being you'd be here longer. Because every time in the program we said that it wasn't working for us, we said that it wasn't helpful, we didn't accept anything that they were saying, they would tell us that we'd have to be there longer. because us resisting in any way was us like being willfully defiant and not accepting the help we needed. Which is why I was there for 13 weeks instead of like
Sure.
8 to 12, because I kept saying I wasn't going to do certain things.
Yeah, you're a fighter. You're strong. And you probably were tired of playing along, right? You came from a family where we all have to pretend. We all have to make it look a certain way, right? We're not going to do anything embarrassing. And you probably were just tired of pretending.
I had the benefit of having already taken, we talked about Duke University before, but I was lucky enough to have taken like psychology classes taught by a psychology like professor at Duke University when I was like, I think 15 and 16. So I'd already read books about like brainwashing and torture and how people break you down psychologically. And in my head, I was like, this program is that.
That's funny.
But it was that I had the benefit of being older than a lot of the other kids in my group, because the average age was, I think, 15, but I was 17 and a half. So I also maybe had a little bit more wherewithal. And also what I thought was really ridiculous was they were saying that everyone had to write a letter of accountability in my wilderness program, which is where you say, I take accountability for doing this and this and that. But I fought it for a long time because I was like, I'm not taking accountability for being abused, because what my therapist was telling me in the program was that she gave us all these like drama triangle packets, where the drama triangle is where each point of the triangle is like there's a persecutor, there's a rescuer, and then there's a victim. And people play these roles and like get caught in this dynamic in the drama triangle, which absolutely can work sometimes. But when it's a child being abused by adults, it's not like a psychological dynamic. I wasn't playing the victim. I was the victim.
Yeah.
So I said for weeks, like, I'm not writing this letter. And then my therapist eventually said, like, you're not leaving this program until you write a letter. I don't know. I don't want to say that like I was a fighter and other people weren't, or I was strong and other people weren't, because we were all trying to just get out and survive.
And there's different ways to do that, right? Like some people, I'm sure, were faking it, right? Trying to play the perfect client. I'll do whatever they say because that's the way home. People like yourself, I mean, maybe fought it. And you were also older, like you said, you were almost an adult yourself at this time, right?
Which was bizarre because the staff were like 20 years old. And it was so ridiculous. I was like, how are these people in charge of me?
We talk about wilderness therapy. What is the therapy aspect? Like, what do you do all day? What is a typical day, typical week? Like, where's the therapeutic activity? Where's the therapy? Like, what is the schedule?
We had one session with a therapist once a week for 1 hour. That was the therapy.
167 hours to go, right? You've got the 1 hour.
Yeah.
What else?
So a lot of hiking, because their draw is like, it teaches kids to be strong. So we were children wearing adults hiking backpacks that were filled with our sleeping bag, all of our clothes, food. And on my wilderness therapy program's website, they say very clearly, like, we don't make students carry more than a third of their body weight. Which is a lie. If you go onto the reviews on my therapy program, wilderness therapy's website, one of the newest reviews is from a staff who left the program saying that they lie about pack weights. Students are carrying much more. I think it was like 60 pounds, but the students are carrying much more than 60 pounds. And we weren't allowed to tell them that they weren't. I remember, I think our packs were weighed once, and the staff wouldn't let us see the actual scale and see how much weight our packs were. So we were children without any proper training, carrying around adult men's hiking backpacks that were usually like a quarter to even a half of our full body weights. So that was hiking. We had hiking 3 to 5 days a week. And that was basically the entire day. We would wake up. We were all assigned a number. And in the morning, staff would say, G2, I was in group 2, roll call. And we all from our sleeping bags had to say, like, list off like 1, 2, 3, 4, and call out our names. We would wake up, and if we were leaving to go to a different campsite that day, we had breakfast. We all got assigned chores for the day. And then we did crushing and sifting, which is when we would take all the coals from our fire pit and put them into these giant tin cans and crush the coals with a giant stick and then spread them around the campsite. Then we would pack up the entire camp and hike, and that was basically the entire day. And then when we got to our next campsite, we would set up the camp and to go to bed. That's a normal day. Our therapist would also assign us, I know it's a podcast, people can't see that I'm doing air quotes quite frequently when I'm doing this, but like we had quote unquote therapy assignments every week. My therapy assignments were a lot of like reading Brene Brown books and writing about how they related to me.
Was any of it helpful? I mean, playing both sides here, trying to be fair, like, did you benefit in any way?
No.
Did you? Okay.
The benefit for me was that I was away from my parents. And my parents had to do therapy in this program. Was the therapy good? No. But at least from then on, they were more careful about the ways they spoke to me.
Gotcha.
But I can, confidently say I would not recommend wilderness therapy for any child ever, no matter what they're struggling with.
How did they justify the 6 months of treatment afterwards if there really wasn't, I'm playing devil's advocate here, right? So if there really wasn't a treatment need, how the heck did you get qualified for 6 months of treatment after the fact?
Yeah. So wilderness programs they brag about like their personal and personalized treatment plans for everybody. But what myself and two of my other friends who also went to the same program in different years found out is that we all had the exact same discharge papers, which were like word for word, like, we believe that blank has made great progress while at this program. However, we remain concerned that if they went home, they run the risk of significant relapse into past behaviors. Even like a short stay for 1 or 2 days would be incredibly detrimental. So we seriously recommend them going to a residential facility after that, which is because I had anxiety. Like, what am I relapsing into? More anxiety?
Feeling anxious?
Yeah. Out of everybody I knew in wilderness therapy, everybody was sent to another treatment center, except for one person whose parents couldn't afford it and 2 people who turned 18 in wilderness and they weren't able to go to a treatment center.
Yeah, I mean, relapsing into anxiety, I got to tell you, I'm feeling like such a heightened sense of anxiety listening to this story because there are so many elements of like human trafficking and behavior modification and almost like programming, right? Like you're even given a number instead of a name, the ritual, the routine, the reporting out. I mean, it's behavior mod, but outside, I guess, is the difference. What about, food, medical needs? What about your biological needs? Like, how are those tended to? I'm imagining, I don't know, a lot of sneaking off behind a bush or something. I don't know. Like, how did you eat and how did you wash yourself and how did you care for yourself?
Yeah. So breakfast every single morning. So I have it here, actually. I'll pull it out.
Okay.
Every meal we ate in wilderness came out of, for me, this exact cup. And we cleaned the cup with dirt. And then we had to carve our own spoon. We were given a plastic spoon for the first week we were there, I think. But then if you didn't make a new spoon, staff would just snap your spoon in half and you had to eat with your hands. So every meal you ate had to be eaten like with your cup and with your wooden spoon. Breakfast every single morning was half a cup of dry oats and half a cup of granola, which was really dry oats again.
Yeah.
But with slightly more flavor. And then if we had brown sugar, we each got 1 tablespoon of brown sugar. Lunch was usually some kind of protein and grain. So like peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, sausage and cheese, pita and hummus. And dinner almost every night was some kind of like cooked vegetable. We had a lot of rice and freeze-dried beans, sometimes pasta. That's the menu.
Okay.
Again, like with the false advertising a lot of these programs put out. My wilderness therapy program on their website says that like, oh, students have things like eggs and bacon for breakfast. They have a wide variety of fruits and vegetables, which is not true at all. We would get an apple or sometimes an orange when we finished hikes. Those were the only. I did not see an egg for the 13 weeks I was there. I also did not see bacon.
You needed to hunt a pig down, a wild pig with your spoon if you wanted bacon.
Go.
And then that was part of the challenge. Yeah. So What about your fellow campers? I mean, was there a lot of communication with you guys? I mean, how were people processing this compared to how you were processing it? Was the vibe pretty much just like, let's just do what we got to do to get home? Like, how was everybody else coping with this experience?
I don't know exactly, because like any kind of like expressing any kind of negativity was greatly discouraged. The first stage we were on was called Earth Phase. And for Earth Phase, you are socially isolated. Like, you're not allowed to speak to any of the other campers. You have a staff next to you at all times. You have one other group member camper who's your mentor. That's the only person you're allowed to talk to. And you're on that Earth Phase until you complete a certain number of assignments. So in a way, they're keeping the worst of it away from us.
The newcomer can't like rally support.
Exactly.
They can't, they're really just sort of the isolation. Prisons do that. And especially war prisoners, right? They keep them separated.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking for the...
You can find strength in others, right? So it doesn't allow you to build that. Yeah.
Also, at a lot of treatment centers, including mine, including Wilderness, like snitching on people was heavily encouraged. It gets very culty.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because the idea that was also pushed was like, anybody doing anything wrong affects the whole group's like treatment process negatively. I'm not quite sure exactly how other people dealt with it for the most part, because we weren't allowed to have any one-on-one conversations. Everything we did had to be within eyesight and earshot of staff. So it was hard to say anything negative. In terms of bathing, twice a week, we got, let me find a good cup or an example. Maybe like a liter of water in this tin can. We got two of those tin cans, and we had a washcloth. And we would go into this little tent. We'd just stand directly in the dirt. And we usually had like shampoo and conditioner, but we didn't have enough water to like clean it out of our hair properly. So eventually I just stopped cleaning my hair. We also had permadirt, despite I'm not sure, I wouldn't call that bathing, but the little washcloth baths. Everybody got a permanent layer of dirt on their skin. That just did not come off because we didn't have proper access to cleaning ourselves. That didn't come off until I was out of the woods for a couple of days and taking showers regularly. You are so dirty. Like, you're covered in dirt. If I did this, if I just rubbed my hand on my other hand, there'd be flakes of dirt that rub off. Our snot was black because of the campfire that we were around every night. Almost all of us had like cracked and bleeding hands because it was so cold outside. We lost sensation in our extremities. So like nose, fingers, feet, quite regularly. Every single one of us, I don't even know what the medical term for this is. I've never been able to find it. But we all had like cold bumps. We all got these itchy like bumps on our butts and thighs. And we were told that was because we were exposed to the cold for too long. One of my friends scratched it so much, it became a staph infection. And she went down to base for, I think, one night and got antibacterial ointment, and then was sent right back up to the woods and told, like, take care of it yourself.
Gotcha. So that's what the base camp does, is it's sort of the medical, like if anybody needs transported out, you've got to get them to base. And then you guys are up in the mountains wandering around, presumably maybe even multiple groups up there at once, but just in different parts.
We weren't allowed to know about other groups. I think there were 9 groups, and 7 of them were people or kids who were like assigned male at birth, and 2 of them were groups of people who were assigned female at birth. But all the staff planned it so that, we'd never run into each other or see each other.
Did you have communication with your parents during the stay, or were you completely like no talking to them, just writing letters?
We were required to write letters every week, and our parents would write some back. There was one week where I wrote a letter, and then I wasn't allowed to speak to them for a month because my therapist told me my letter was think she said like passive and manipulative. And I went back and read it. It's on, on my TikTok and Instagram, I've read this letter and I'm like, this isn't passive or manipulative, but just being very confused. And I wrote in journals every day and I was like, I didn't mean to be manipulative. I didn't mean to be passive. I don't know what I'm doing wrong. So then I wasn't allowed to talk to them for a month. Some other students, or I don't know what to call them, campers, students, other kids in the program could have phone calls with their parents when they reached a certain level of trust. I only had one phone call with my parents, and it was, I think, a couple of days before they were going to take me to the next treatment center.
What did this do for your relationship? I mean, you get back home, I mean, like almost a year, well, not a year, so 13 weeks plus the 6 months. I mean, yeah, almost a year, I guess, after the fact. Did you ever go back home? Did you go back home for a period of time? And how did you and your family process this or reconnect after this experience? I would have to think you would have felt very betrayed. And I don't know, how do you reconnect with a family member that sends you away to something like this? You know, what was that process of reconnection like? And was there a process of reconnection?
I was absolutely brainwashed. I came back, and for the first year after I was back from treatment, I was very much like, I needed this. It was what helped me. These programs were good for me. I would have ended up very badly if it weren't not for these programs. And anybody who even brought the slightest criticism, I became like, very, very defensive of the programs.
That's interesting.
Yeah. But, it makes sense because I didn't want to think about how bad it actually was.
That's almost like Stockholm syndrome. Have you heard of that?
Yes.
It's an old joke, right? Like somebody tried to tell me a story about Stockholm syndrome, and it started out really bad, but by the end, I liked it. I liked it a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's what I'm seeing there, right? It's like Stockholm syndrome. You come back and you're a fierce defender, and your parents probably had the sense of like, we did it. We did the right thing. It worked. We saved our daughter.
Exactly. So for the first year after I was back, I treated, honestly, these weren't my parents, but I treated the people I loved most pretty badly. And I didn't know why. Looking back, I was like, oh, it makes sense that I was treating these people I loved badly because I was so afraid of them leaving me or me being taken away again, which happens sometimes. I've heard of people being sent away to these places multiple times and coming back and being sent again.
Sure.
So it wasn't until probably the winter of maybe it was the winter after I came back. It gets fuzzy. I had a gap year because I was supposed to go to college. And the college application season was when I was in wilderness therapy. And I was like, hey guys, how do I apply to colleges? And they were just like, oh, you don't. Like, you will not be going to college. So I had a gap year where I was working and living in my parents' house. And for that time, I think I just, my brain, the brain knows when you're in a safe environment to process things. And I think my brain was like, this is not the right environment to think about this. But I started seeing videos on TikTok of other people who'd been to wilderness therapy and residential centers. And that's when I started thinking, like, maybe this wasn't good. Maybe this was bad, in fact. And then I started reading more about, like trauma-informed care and what can actually help people, as well as like looking into all the deaths and serious injuries and lawsuits that have happened in wilderness therapy and in residential centers. But it took me a good while to realize it.
Well, and it also took you getting information from the outside world, right? Like it wasn't from within your family and it wasn't from the program. You had not even unbiased, but you just had people with different experiences exposing you to like, well, no, there's a different way of looking at this. And that was something that you were able to open your eyes. And also an interesting repeat of that earlier pattern of yours where on paper it looks really good, but internally I'm struggling. Right?
Yeah.
You come home, right? And on the outside, this was great. Thank you so much. I needed this. But inside, there's this inner turmoil that's brewing. So it doesn't connect, right? They're never fully congruent. But I think that's great because you're learning to listen to that inside voice and say, no, your body knows. Your body knows if you're safe. Your body knows if this is good. So you are developing the ability to hear yourself. So crazy. So if this is, I mean, I don't even know where to start. Like I'm thinking about your story and I have, I've talked about in the podcast, I have children and, I'm thinking about my 9-year-old, my 13-year-old and ever getting to a place where I could subject them to this. But part of the story here is you don't think your parents knew what they were subjecting you to at the time. There's a lot of misleading information to parents. It's not like they knew you were never going to get eggs or they knew you were going to have perma-dirt. You know what I mean? Like, so there is some measure of forgiveness. But going back, here's the $1 million question then. What should they have done instead? Right. So this is every parent with a struggling teenager right now who's listening to this. They're going, okay, we've been pitched by these wilderness camps and we're thinking about all options. And at the heart of the matter, we want to do anything we can to help our son and daughter. And this is presented as a potential source of help. Okay, not great, very damaging, very harmful. So what, if you could go back in time and sort of advise your parents, what would you have had them do instead?
Not abusing me would have been great.
It's a good start, yes.
I'd say that's by far the biggest thing. Most of the people, I'd say almost all the people I knew in wilderness therapy and in my treatment center had dysfunctional relationships with their parents. Their parents were abusive, or these kids were in the foster care system for many, many years, or their parents had a really messy divorce, or there was infidelity in the family, or there was, abuse, or their parents were dead. So yes, facilities do manipulate these parents to a great extent. There are parents who send their kids to these places because I don't want to blame any parents. I don't have kids. I don't want to parent shame. But if you go onto the website of My Wilderness Therapy, if you go into Google's My Wilderness Therapy's company, they have 1-star average out of 400 reviews because so many of the reviews are this is terrible. Don't send your kids here. By now Paris Hilton has a very famous documentary about this. There are news articles, there are podcasts like this one, there are posts all over social media. So it's to a certain extent, you have to be willfully ignorant. You would have to ignore these hundreds and hundreds of people saying this is terrible, don't do this. For parents who are struggling with their kids, the biggest thing I would say is listen to them. I was asking my parents for antidepressants for years. I was asking for therapy. Listening to your kid, really, both Unsilence and Breaking Code Silence are nonprofit organizations that are run by survivors of these industries, and they have a lot of resources to alternative methods of help, intensive outpatient trauma-informed care, ways that your child is still able to have autonomy. I haven't gone through this personally, but I can understand how scary it would be to have your child struggling so much with something, to be hurting so much, to be truly, in fear of your child's life and safety and future. And I can also understand how tempting and how alluring it would be to hear these reassurances of really what these programs say, which is it is not the parent's fault at all in any way. And if you just pay us, $100,000, your child will be back and better than ever. And you don't even have to do any work. You just let us deal with your kid and send them away, and they'll come back a new person.
How is your relationship with your parents today?
Oh, they disowned me because of my TikTok and my Instagram, because of me talking about these programs.
Wow.
Yeah, I was originally anonymous online because I didn't want parents to find the account, although I don't really speak about them because I wanted to, respect their privacy. Somebody sent them my accounts and they found them. And our first conversation was them saying, we want you to take down your page. And I said, okay, I want you guys to go to therapy. And if you go to therapy, I will take down my videos.
Fair trade. Seems like a pretty good deal.
No, yeah. I said, I really would like to have a relationship with you. Just go to therapy. And once you're in therapy, tell me whatever videos you want me to take down. If you want me to paint you in a really good light, anything. And they came back. This was March or April of this year, and said that they were disowning me. So we don't speak very often. I also know that they talk to a lot of my relatives and family friends and say things like, I'm only doing this because Paris Hilton did it. And, like, I'm very manipulative and you can't trust anything I say. So that's our relationship now.
Yeah.
We're very low contact. I'm on my own health insurance now. I'm, paying my own college tuition. All that stuff. Yeah.
What are you studying? Do you mind if I ask?
No, sure. So a couple different things. I am a theater major. That's like a passion of mine. I've been trained in Shakespeare since I was 10 years old, which is like crazy. And then I
Yeah.
also have a minor in Russian and Russian studies. I just finished my second year of Russian language. And then I might add another minor in political science or psychology, because I'm also very interested in both of those things.
That's where I was digging for. I wondered if you weren't drawn to that side of the equation, having gone through this,
The mental health care system needs to be so much better.
Amen.
Yeah.
I work in it every day. Amen. Absolutely. I mean, most systems can stand some improvement, but there's a lot of talk about how, mental health, it's insufficient in this country, and the mental health, pandemic and epidemic is growing, and there's not enough providers. And yeah, there are some systemic issues, but I will tell you, a lot of the wounds that hold us back in the mental health care system are self-inflicted. The way that we manage things bureaucratically, the way we put up artificial barriers to care, even the reimbursement system, the quality versus quantity of care, and letting managed care tell trained clinicians. You've got people who, have never done one therapy session in their life, reading treatment plans and deciding whether somebody should have extra care, while their therapist is sitting there begging for the insurance company to pay for extra sessions, all the way down to reimbursement levels. I've shared this on this show before. You would make 4 times the amount of money running a panic room at the mall than you would running a therapy clinic if you talk about how much money you get for that room for the hour, right? And it doesn't take master's level people to run a panic room. No offense, panic rooms are fun, but it doesn't take a master's degree to run, right? So, there's a lot of self-inflicted wounds. Most important question that we'll probably talk about this entire time, having gone through all of this, how are you today? Are you thriving? Are you surviving? Are you somewhere in the middle? What is your health and mental health like today?
I'm thriving. I got out of my house, which was by far the biggest issue.
Congrats.
Thank you. I'm halfway through school and I'm on track to be graduating with honors. So
of course,
keeping those on the straight A's. Yes.
Yeah, yes.
And
yes.
I'm happy. I'm, very, very lucky to, although unfortunately not have had the relationship with my parents that I would have liked to have had. I'm very lucky to have wonderful found family, both, adults and mentors who are looking out for me and caring for me, as well as wonderful friends. Some of them are friends you've met through this advocacy work, other survivors, and they're great to talk to because it's hard to be relatable in a lot of ways. We don't know long-term what the effects of these programs are on kids, but just speaking from personal experience, like, it was so hard to me to know how to speak to people normally or interact with people in a normal way. It's hard for me to relate to people because, like, this huge part of my childhood is just gone.
It's sort of Greta-esque, right? You've stolen my childhood in a very real way. I mean, what did you do your senior year? What did you do your junior year? Like, what was your favorite high school summer? You're like, I like the day we got the extra can of beans because it wasn't so it wasn't so terrible that night. So, amazing. We're getting close on time, but I mean, I want to hear more about your advocacy work. So what are you working on? Do you have certain platforms you want to direct people to? Like, how do people find you and connect with you and learn more about your story?
Absolutely. So I am trail seasoning, TrailSeasoning Did I spell that correctly? I think I did, on TikTok.
I think so, yeah.
Okay, perfect. And then I'm trail.seasoning on Instagram. I'm trailseasoning@gmail.com if you want to email me. Those are the big platforms.
And what's your goal? What's your goal for your TikTok? What's your goal for your online message? Like, what are you trying to get out there and accomplish?
Ideally, I want no kid to ever go through what I went through. This is an incredibly immoral, unethical, harmful method of treating and also just looking at mental illness and children struggling. Out of all the things that I've gone through in my life, the sexual abuse, the physical abuse, treatment was the most traumatic thing I've been through. Because these are children being ripped away from their home, their families, their friends, their communities for years, usually at a time, when they're not allowed to contact most of the friends, when they're being watched constantly, when somebody else is controlling what they're doing in a day, when they're eating, when they're sleeping, the amounts of food they get, when they're allowed to do everything. It is so cruel, truly. If I can just get one parent to not send their child through this because of me, I would consider that a success.
Well, you've saved two, because after hearing your story, no matter what may come, I know two kids that live in my house that will never be going through this. So you have that, and I want to connect with you, and I want to join with you. I don't know what this means, but whatever I can do on the business side, the therapy side, or the podcast side to help you with your message, that statement you made about I went through sexual abuse, I went through physical abuse, I went through emotional abuse and neglect, and the worst thing that ever happened to me was treatment. That we can't have people feeling that way. We can't have people walking around. So whatever I can do to make that a thing of the past and to make that something that nobody ever has to say again. I've dedicated my life to treating people. I've dedicated my life to therapy and helping people. It's an understatement of the year to say that's the opposite of what we want people saying in terms of what their experience in treatment was. And it breaks my heart that you had to say that and that you can say that. But it also fills me with a layer of just pride and awe that you've come out the other side as capable and thriving like you are. With all your work, I hope you take a couple moments to recognize how far you've come and just what you've accomplished already. I don't know. Even if you get a B between now and the end of your college degrees, I think you've got a lot to be proud of. So. Okay, so on a lighter note, Trail Seasoning. Tell me the story behind that name. Why did you pick that for all of your accounts?
In my wilderness therapy, our food constantly had like dirt and soot and ash in it. And the staff would joke about it. When we said we didn't want to eat it, they'd say, "Oh, that's just trail seasoning."
Okay. All right. Well, that's awful. That is terrible. That is terrible. So, all right. Well, listen, TS, we're close on time, but I want to, just so much appreciation for you coming to share your story. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for being honest about this. I think it takes a certain level of bravery to push past all of that. I have no doubt this is going to help people, and just thank you for this time. I learned a lot that I don't want to know, but I'm glad that I know it now. So thank you for having the bravery to come on and share this with us. I really appreciate you for this.
It's been lovely talking to you. Thank you for having me on.
We'll do it again soon. We'll do it again very soon. And so again, as we're handing out these thanks to everybody who's watching. Final thanks to TS. Final thanks to producer Ian. Very smooth ride as always with Ian at the controls. And a final thanks to you for watching. Like I always say, time is your most valuable resource. It's your most valuable asset. Thank you for spending some of that time with us and hearing TS's story. I hope you got as much out of it as I did. I was blown away, and I trust that you guys are as well. So until next time, take care of yourself. And take care of each other, especially your children and those you're in charge of. Thanks so much. Talk to you soon.